Some people act like the Bible was written in English, but Jesus didn't speak English. He spoke Hebrew. The apostles didn't preach in English. They preached from the Torah and the prophets in Hebrew. The Psalms weren't sung in English. They were sung in Hebrew. God didn't reveal himself through the King James Version. He revealed himself through a Jewish people, in a Jewish land, in a Jewish language. If you forget that, you might be reading the right book, but missing the real story. What if I told you Jesus never spoke a word of English, and yet millions read his words as if they came from a Western book? But he didn't come through Rome. He came through Israel. Jesus, or Yeshua, wasn't a Westerner. He didn't grow up in Europe or in a world of cathedrals. He was born in Israel among the Jewish people and spoke their language, Hebrew. Though Aramaic was spoken in the region, Hebrew remained the sacred language of scripture, prayer, and teaching. Yeshua read from the Torah in Hebrew, quoted the prophets in Hebrew, and taught in Hebrew. When he stood up in the synagogue to read from Isaiah, it was in Hebrew. When he debated the Pharisees or taught the crowds, it was rooted in the sacred vocabulary of the Hebrew Bible. Hebrew wasn't just a language. It was the vessel of divine revelation. The words Yeshua used were the same words that formed the world in Genesis, that shaped the covenant with Abraham, and that thundered from Sinai. And this didn't stop at his death. After his resurrection, when he appeared to Saul, Paul, on the road to Damascus, he spoke to him in Hebrew. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Even at his crucifixion, the sign above his head read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," written in 3 languages, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. That alone tells us which culture and language stood at the center of his identity. Pilate didn't choose those languages randomly. He wanted everyone, including the Jews, to read and understand. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. In some modern Bible translations, the word Aramaic appears instead of Hebrew, but in the original Greek of John 19:20, the word used is Evraisti, which specifically refers to Hebrew. This linguistic detail confirms that Hebrew was still recognized as a central and authoritative language in Judea during the time of Yeshua. Many believers read the Bible as if it were written in King James English, forgetting that every word originated in Hebrew and some Aramaic and Greek. The Tanakh, Old Testament, was entirely written in Hebrew, the language of covenant and prophecy. Every name, every promise, every command was shaped in Hebrew. When God spoke to the prophets, it wasn't in English. It was in the ancient tongue of Israel, a language rich with layers, rhythm, and spiritual depth. Even the New Testament, though written in Greek, is soaked in Hebrew worldview and idioms. The authors thought in Hebrew, quoted the Hebrew scriptures, and spoke to an audience steeped in Jewish tradition. Expressions like binding and loosing, the kingdom of heaven, or even son of man only make full sense within a Jewish, Hebrew-speaking context. Biblical language carries covenantal weight. To read it as mere literature, in a language disconnected from its original heart, is to risk missing its voice entirely. When we read the Bible without its original language in mind, we risk reducing divine revelation to something foreign to its roots. The words of the Lord are pure words, like silver refined in a furnace. When Peter preached at Pentecost, or when Paul entered the synagogues, they weren't quoting the New Testament. It hadn't been written yet. They preached the gospel using the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Their scriptures were in Hebrew. Their message was simple. The Messiah promised in the Hebrew scriptures had come, and his name is Yeshua. Peter's sermon in Acts 2 is entirely grounded in the Hebrew scriptures. He quotes the prophet Joel, refers to King David, and explains how the resurrection of Yeshua fulfills the promises made to Israel. Paul, when speaking in synagogues, reasoned from the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, showing how Yeshua is the fulfillment of what was foretold. These early believers didn't invent new doctrines. They revealed ancient truths, and their audience, Jewish listeners, familiar with the language and the texts, understood exactly what was being proclaimed. They weren't forming a new religion. They were revealing the fullness of the old. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Yeshua's parables, sayings, and teachings were full of Hebrew depth. They often used wordplay, double meanings, and biblical allusions, most of which are lost in translation. For example, when he says, "This is my body," the Hebrew word for bread, lahem, can also symbolize nourishment, sacrifice, and even warfare. This kind of layered meaning only exists in Hebrew. The parables, about seeds, vineyards, shepherds, and kings, were not abstract stories. They were rooted in the Hebrew scriptures and echoed the prophetic style of Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah. Many of these teachings draw directly from themes that only make full sense when connected to the Hebrew worldview of covenant, land, and holiness. Even common phrases like, "He who has ears to hear," let him hear, reflect the Hebrew concept of Shema, hearing as obedience. These connections are not accidental. They are essential. When we strip his words of their Hebrew roots, we flatten their power. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. This is not just about linguistics. It's about truth. When we disconnect Jesus from his Hebrew identity, we risk creating a version of the gospel he wouldn't recognize. The story of Yeshua doesn't begin in Bethlehem. It begins in Genesis. It flows through Abraham, Moses, David, and the prophets. It culminates in a Jewish Messiah, speaking a Jewish language, fulfilling a Jewish promise. When churches remove all traces of Jewish context from their teaching, they may still speak about Jesus, but not the Jesus of history. When theology forgets Jerusalem and only remembers Rome, it becomes detached from the very soil in which the gospel was planted. This matters because Yeshua did not erase the story of Israel. He fulfilled it, and any gospel that forgets the root risks withering the fruit. We may be reading the right book, but if we forget its context, we miss its meaning. Salvation is from the Jews. God didn't reveal himself through a Western empire. He chose a people, a land, and a language, and through them, he revealed his heart. Yeshua didn't leave his Jewish identity behind. Even in resurrection, his scars were still visible. His message was still covenantal. His mission was still rooted in the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To forget that Yeshua was, is, and remains the Jewish Messiah is to misunderstand the gospel at its core. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. Much of modern theology has been shaped more by Rome than by Jerusalem, but God is calling his people back to the source, back to the story, back to the soil where it all began. If we want clarity and confusion, depth and devotion, and power and proclamation, we must return to the Hebrew roots of our faith, because only there can we truly grasp the Messiah's mission. I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them.